Almost every civilization in human history throughout the globe has fostered spaces for discussion and debate over politics, philosophy, culture, and the issues of the day, what we usually refer to as the commons. From the Athens of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle to the London of Marx, Darwin, and Dickens, or the France of Voltaire, Rousseau, and Robespierre. These spaces have shaped who we are as people. With the invention of the internet, the commons have become mobile and advanced, but also, how shall we say, spectacle.
You give me the awful impression, I hate to have to say it, of someone who hasn't read any of the arguments against your position ever.
I've read all the arguments.
I don't see how you can be...
Reality checks here. Do you have any idea, sir, how pathetic it must be to be you?
Just say it, just say it.
Can you speak for
Well,
all
why
black
don't you
people?
stop speaking for black people? That would be
not.
great, okay?
I'm not.
Why don't you let,
Successful corporation.
I mean, is it a voluntary association? Is there any cram down happening?
No, there's not.
Then good, it's capitalist. That's not socialist.
It's not.
Joke, some thoughtful discussion, but your head pops off the pillow in the morning with, oh, how can I be a professional victim today? Let me go in.
I'm not anybody's victim. Whose victim am I? All right. Whose victim am I? Whose victim am I? I don't want anything from you. I want you to live your life in peace. Go.
No, I'm not telling you how to live. No. You are, because you're arguing for a governmental structure. A lack of one, rather. So even a lack of a governmental structure will then make me live the way you want me to live.
Oh, you think this is gonna get better? No. Is he gonna check his privilege? That's not going to happen. I don't want to come out here and give someone the finger, but it's because you walk out, this chick is a...
Now, these aspects of public discourse have been present for thousands of years. The one-upsmanship, race to invent the most concepts, the need to prove your side more correct than your opponents. All that has been there. At a passing glance, the intellectual dark web, or whatever the anti-SJWs want to be called, could be seen as just a continuation of these competitive elements of the discourse. But when one dives deeper, you quickly learn that is not the case. The people I'm talking about are not really interested in having a dialogue, learning about the world, or bettering the human race. No, they seem to only truly want to make bad ideas sound cool, rational, and reasonable, and create parallel universes of conservatism, easy answers, and capitalism being awesome. Which is what this possible new short series of mine is going to look at: the people protecting the status quo and trying to make it worse. I'm calling this Destroying the Internet, and the still possible series is going to be on certain right-wing personalities. Beginning with, according to a Twitter poll, the cool kid's philosopher himself, Ben Shapiro. Part 1. Ben Shapiro. Benjamin Aaron Shapiro. Man, the name is biblical up until Shapiro. Is a Jewish-American lawyer, political commentator, and writer born, raised, and based in Los Angeles, California. I was kind of hoping this would go first, or at least be front and center, since Shapiro's name will probably be the most familiar to those outside the political spheres of the internet, however possible that is nowadays. Anyways, so, in his formative years, Shapiro was already something of a quote-unquote intellectual. After skipping 3rd and 9th grade, Ben graduated from high school in 2000 at the age of 16, graduated summa cum laude at UCLA in 2004, age 20, and then graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School in 2007. I'd say that's pretty impressive. In the meantime, Ben became the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in America in 2001 at the age of 17, and by the time that he was 21, he had already written 2 books. Quite the achievements that Ben has. At least if you leave out most of his actual writings, and positions, and temperament, and voice. It's really weird that of all the youngish conservatives out there, someone as uncharismatic, stuffy, and prickly as Shapiro could become so popular. Which means it's about time to get into more detail on just that. But how to start tackling this? Well, I am a history guy, I suppose, so let's begin with the evils of Ben's early days. Young man, old opinions. Take a step back in time with me. I know, such a change from all of my other videos. To 2002, the first year I focused on that I was actually alive for, even though I was only 2. Anyways, let's set the scene. The war in Afghanistan was just starting to ramp up. Bush signed No Child Left Behind, Enron started crumbling, and the Iraq War was authorized after a year's worth of propaganda, misinformation, and fear-mongering. It was the worst of times. It was... no, just the worst. But through it all, our eternally rational, ever fact-based boy king, Ben Shapiro, was there to lead us through the chaos. I would go on, but sarcasm has its limits, and I've almost reached it already. Yeah, Ben's career began during the Bush administration, and he was lockstep with the conservative establishment that had been building for decades. And with that comes some truly horrible and ludicrous opinions. Might as well run through some of my favorites. Whitewashing the Palestinians, in which Ben complains about the then new movie Sum of All Fears, and how they changed the villains from, as they were in the original Tom Clancy novel, Palestinian terrorists to neo-fascists. Telling. Banned on campus, in which Ben throws a temper tantrum that many universities ban ROTC from campus, mostly because of Vietnam and Kent State, and makes a hilariously realistic proposal that they be bombed as a result. Enemy civilian casualties, air quotes, okay by me, which is exactly what it sounds like, and Ben is not joking about the thousands of Afghan civilian casualties. Eradicate the State Department, in which Ben whines that the State Department should go because it isn't being hawkish and trigger-happy enough in the Middle East for his taste. Without God, 9/11 is only the beginning, in which Ben agrees with Reverend Jerry Falwell, blaming 9/11 on abortion, gays, feminists, and lesbians, to complain about public schools not being allowed to indoctrinate students with religion like the old days. Those were all from just 1 year. Ben was one of those commentators, a curmudgeonly neoconservative trying desperately to make the Bush administration the good guys, and thinly veil their inhuman worldview behind self-righteousness, appeals to patriotism, and patronizing judgment. Seriously, the only real difference between him and, say, Rush Limbaugh is Ben's age and education. Otherwise, same person. Yes, during the Bush years, Shapiro racked up quite the despicable catalog of calling for more religious indoctrination in public schools, condemning gays and lesbians for propagating a supposed, quote, militant gay agenda, calling the Supreme Court illegitimate because it wasn't extreme enough, more religious gay bashing, licking W's boots, calling the left Nazis and idiots, more religious gay bashing, he does it a lot, and defending the Iraq War. He called it our duty to empire build. Yikes. Also, that we should bomb countries that aren't a threat to us. Now, unless reality has a partisan far-right bias, none of that is very in line with Ben's reputation of using facts and logic to obliterate his opponents. Anyways, despite his early milestones and quick rise, Ben languished in relative obscurity in the mainstream for years. Sure, he had his moments in the spotlight, wrote several terrible books and more articles, and ran in the same circles as other conservative pundits just as odious. The Bush years came to an end, and along came the made-up opportunity of a conservative lifetime. Barack Hussein Obama. From the words,
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
Shapiro was attacking Obama and his administration for every petty or made-up detail, just like every other conservative mouthpiece on Fox News. Article after article, Ben was seething with rage and called the Obama administration, in its first year, fascist, anti-Semitic, corrupt, authoritarian, totalitarian, socialist, childish, over and over. He called Obama's first State of the Union fascist and started building something of an audience for his commentary. Then came his big break, back when you could call it that. In 2012, Shapiro was made editor-at-large for Breitbart. Yes, that Breitbart. From this position, Ben continued to build his profile and reputation in the conservative sphere, all while being relentlessly trashed for being Jewish, something he tolerated for way longer than is reasonable, and only finally got sick of it in 2016 after a convenient spat with the higher-ups over the Michelle Fields incident. Then, finally, the moment that put our little boy on the map. His January 10th, 2013 interview debate with Piers Morgan on gun control. Now, everyone hates Piers Morgan. Seriously, everyone. He probably hate himself if he wasn't so deluded. Anyhow, this was such a pathetic debate. I'll let Piers off on one point, though. This was very shortly after his interview with Alex Jones, only about a week or two later. Jones was, well...
Get about to the second. I want to blame the real culprit.
Alex.
Suicide pills.
Alex.
Mass murder pills.
Okay.
1776 will commence again.
Alex Jones, and I guess Piers thought that Ben Shapiro was going to be a similar experience. It wasn't. Regardless, Piers fell into every rhetorical trap Ben set for him, and Ben in turn ran circles around Piers with ease. Now, if you watch the interview, it's fairly easy to dissect and brush aside Shapiro's arguments, but you have to ignore Piers, who has no idea what he's doing. Quick run-through. Ben poked the bear and said Piers was standing in the graves of children killed at Sandy Hook, and said he was a bully on the issue of guns. At the very beginning of the interview. Clearly he was trying to get a reaction out of Piers, which he did, and thus it makes Ben look more reasonable automatically, despite his ridiculous statement. Ben, with his infinite lack of humility, pulled out a pocket version of the Constitution for Piers to read the Second Amendment. Don't really have any commentary on that, it's just kind of a dumb move. I'm so tired. Ben stated basically that because his grandparents, who were European Jews in the 1930s, didn't believe in his position on protecting gun rights, that's why, quote,
is why they're now ashes in Europe.
Not only is that victim blaming, it's Holocaust victim blaming. And by a very devout and Orthodox Jewish man. Even then, he's lying to improve his argument. The Nazis didn't implement gun control, they banned Jews from owning all weapons, and made it actually easier for non-Jewish Germans to obtain guns. He says Piers is standing on graves. Ben is standing on millions of graves with that horrific argument. Ben then argues that he believes in the Second Amendment not for hunting or defense, but in case the government becomes tyrannical, which he states was the original intent of the Second Amendment. Nope, not at all. Socialists have kind of really dropped the ball for a number of decades in defending the Second Amendment coherently and rationally, and just left the far right to define the terms. There is a Socialist Rifle Association now, if you're interested. Regardless, the Second Amendment was written in 1787, decades before the first police force was established in America to protect private property, BT dubs, and it was never, ever an individual right to own guns. It was very clear that what the founders intended was for state militias to be formed independent of the government, since state borders were a lot more important back then, to provide for defense within the states. It is not, like every conservative wants you to think, the break glass in case of tyranny amendment. It just isn't. You can read the transcript or watch the video if you'd like. Ben comes off as more rational, despite using blatantly extreme and ridiculous arguments, because Piers keeps falling into his rhetorical traps. If someone actually skilled in debate, which I am by no means saying I am, took Ben to task on those arguments before, it would have been a completely different story. But this is not what happened. The interview caused Shapiro's public image to explode into the mainstream, and he began a steep rise towards becoming what the New York Times would call the cool kids philosopher. Even before the Morgan interview, however, Shapiro had been taken under the wing of Jeremy Boring, a conservative Hollywood producer from Texas, who would become the architect of Ben's monumental rise and particularly his reinvention. They began cooking up the idea of a 21st century media company representing the right wing, the heir, so to speak, of the Drudge Report and Breitbart, with all the podcasts, videos, and modern media accessories needed to make it, quote, cool. Within 2 years, that company was a reality in the form of the Daily Wire, with Boring as the self-appointed God King, his words, and Shapiro as the frontman, now with a new wardrobe and hairstyle. Now Ben could bring his obnoxious snark and fast-talking squawking to the masses. Ben Shapiro has become something of an untouchable icon for conservatives against, quote, the left. On YouTube particularly, if you go to almost any video which is critical of Ben, often has a lot of dislikes and angry comments from his supporters, saying he's smarter to debate him or something of the sort. Don't care really, gonna criticize him anyways, so let's begin. Ben on pilgrimage. Ben Shapiro is Jewish. If you didn't know that, don't worry, he'll tell you about it 10 times a day.
When I first got started, so my parents became Orthodox when I was 11, so we're both Jewish. Jewishness isn't just about latkes and bagels. It's about observance and adherence to the Torah. It says, you see the thing on the top of my head, right? This funny hat. It's called the yarmulke. Okay, white supremacists aren't that fond of it. I wear the yarmulke on my head because I live my religion. I pray 3 times a day in Hebrew because I live my religion. I eat kosher because I live my religion. I study Talmud daily because I live my religion.
Men's baby with a little music symbol. Now, as a Jew,
plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot.
He'll also call you an anti-Semite with just as much regularity, and for the most petty things. Quick example. In 2015, Patton Oswalt, the lefty comedian, was lamenting the ridiculousness of the GOP presidential debates when Ben decided to jump in for some reason. Patton wished him well and said, quote, "Give my love to Irving Kristol's dumb ghost." Irving Kristol being a Brooklyn-born Jewish journalist credited as the godfather of neoconservatism from the 1960s and 1970s. Ben called Patton an anti-Semite, and that he only brought up Kristol because he and Ben were both Jewish, because he doesn't share Kristol's philosophy. What? Wait. What? Ben, yes you do, in like every way. Have you met you? The guy who advocated for the Iraq War and supported George W. Bush? That's you, Ben. Okay, let's move this along. Ben, as an apparent opponent of identity politics, has quite a history of weaponizing his religion, you know, his identity, to criticize pretty much anyone he doesn't like. The irony is palpable. Alright, I'll be fair to Ben on one point. He's one of the most frequent targets of legitimate anti-Semitism since his departure from Breitbart. But not from the left, from the alt-right, mostly due to his being a never-Trump Republican since 2016. Again, none of the unquestionable anti-Semitism coming from anyone but people who, if push comes to shove, would agree with him more than disagree. Now, I say that to suggest Ben is just really accustomed to having to put his guard up, which would be an easier defense to make if he hadn't been doing the same thing for almost a decade before leaving Breitbart. But enough sidestepping the actual subject. What is Ben's reasoning? As a conservative Orthodox Jew, Ben is a fervent, die-hard defender and supporter of Israel and its status as a Jewish state. It's pretty much a default in mainstream media to conflate anti-Semitism with support for the Palestinian/opposing Israeli occupation. However, Ben takes this to its extreme. Why not we do a run-through? As we've already seen, Ben considers neoconservative to be an anti-Semitic slur, even when it accurately describes his views, and I could mention how he's called PETA literal Nazis. But anyways, according to Ben, Obama was a fascist totalitarian with deep hatred for Jews. His evidence? Obama asked for a jobs bill quickly, directly put down his political opponents, like most politicians really, and looked arrogant when he made speeches. Only the most fine pettiness for Ben here. As for Obama's hatred, Ben cites several things. After the Israeli military stormed an aid flotilla headed for Gaza and killed 9 activists, in a manner which the UN later dubbed, quote, an extra-legal, arbitrary, and summary execution, the Obama administration issued a statement bemoaning the loss of life. Shapiro said that the speed of the response was evident of its anti-Semitism. Because not agreeing with cold-blooded murder is the same as wanting to destroy Israel, right? In 2009, Rahm Emanuel, the then White House Chief of Staff, now Mayor of Chicago, and a Jewish man, spoke at AIPAC, the top DC lobbying group for Israel, and reportedly connected U.S. efforts to thwart Iran's nuclear program with successful peace talks between the Palestinians and Israelis, leading Ben, among other people, to criticize him for putting Israel to a higher standard than other nations. Sure, Ben. It was quickly revealed that Emanuel had said nothing of the sort, which led many to issue retractions. But not Ben, oh no. Despite having literally no leg to stand on, Ben called Rahm a capo, which was the name for Jews in the concentration camps that helped the Nazis supervise other prisoners. Sure, Ben, but nope. When dealing with this issue, Ben seems to be continually deeming himself the sole arbiter of what is right and correct for all Jews. He said of any Jewish person who voted for Obama was not actually a Jew, but a Jew in name only, or Gino, serving the enemies of the Jewish people. He said they were a, quote, disgrace and were, quote, twisted and evil, self-hating Jews, dedicated to undermining the Israeli government and thus held anti-Semitic views. Considering the overwhelming majority of American Jews vote Democrat, those comments are surely from a man who is very not mad. Completely reasonable to say all the people of your faith who don't think quite the way you do hate themselves. Right? To Ben, so it seems, being a real Jew requires you to be in favor of Israel no matter how many times they kill Palestinian children, illegally blockade Gaza and the West Bank, or otherwise break international law. And if you disagree, then you've got to be an anti-Semite or a fake Jew. He's a hardliner's hardliner who thinks himself the last line of defense against anti-Semitism. Ben, though, is honestly a hollow advocate, so to speak, for Jewish people and taking a stand against anti-Semitism, especially as it seems he can't recognize it when it's literally staring him in the face and shaking his hand. Great job on this one, Ben. As you may or may not have known, Iowa Congressman Steve King is a white supremacist, something that Congress took way too long to accept, and is Ben's former best friend. Ben even dedicated an entire article to defending King against allegations of his incredibly obvious, increasingly apparent neo-Nazi tendencies. It literally took him publicly saying he was a white supremacist for Ben to reverse course. Again, great job, Ben. That isn't where it ends, though. According to a report from Data and Society, which was released in 2018, it's not a perfect study, but it's still got its merits. Shapiro's YouTube channel is one of the starting points for channels associated with the alt-right. You know, the people who make videos about the Jewish question, say Jews control all the banks, and deny that the Holocaust happened. The alt-right might hate Ben, but he's still a fairly good recruiter for them, whether he knows it or not. But then again, Ben is an awful advocate against bigotry and racism in general. When neighborhood watcher George Zimmerman, after stalking him on pure suspicion, shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin on February 26, 2012 in Sanford, Florida, Ben concluded that there was no evidence of Zimmerman being a racist. Sure. And that Trayvon deserved to die for fighting back against the guy who had been reporting solely black teens to the police for months before the murder and had a history of open racism. Again, great job, Ben. It's a wonder that Ben makes an effort against anti-Semitism at all, to be honest. I'm guessing it's still the conservative thing when it comes to this stuff, that it's fine until it happens to me. If Shapiro wasn't Jewish himself, I wouldn't be surprised if he was indifferent to the issue. Okay, long enough tangent. Why is Ben a poor advocate? Simple. Ben Shapiro is a racist, and I have no problem saying that. Though I'm going to have to explain why. Ben Shapiro and the Arab question. A very common argument, or maybe battle cry for the right wing, particularly those who have online platforms of a sort, is that the left has no rational argument and only can resort to calling their opponent a racist. Now, there are people who do this on the left, right, and center of the political spectrum, and it's more likely to come from someone either not actually looking for a debate or who is simply not interested in listening. Having been through this barrage before, I'm pretty wary to unironically refer to someone as a racist. Ben, of course, is one of those commentators who loves it when people call him a racist, because then he can go into a tirade about how they have no arguments. However, I do have some very good reasons for calling Mr. Ben Shapiro a racist. Let's begin, shall we? And what better place to begin than probably the best known example? In 2010, back in the days of relative obscurity, Ben tweeted the following: Israelis like to build. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. Hashtag settlements rock. Try replacing that sentiment with any other minority group. Seriously, just pick one, and tell me with a straight face that it isn't racist. Now, Ben has been actually criticized for this statement in the past, but it is really a microcosm of his views on Arabs in general. Unlike most conservative commentators on the issue, Ben has been fairly explicit in his framing. He referred to the Israeli-Arab conflict as a fight between darkness and light, with illegal Israeli settlements being, quote, outposts of light in a dark territory, and apparently those who oppose them want, quote, the continued victory of night. Arabs apparently, quote, value murder, while Israelis, quote, value light. As such, Arabs must be people of darkness. But Palestinian Arabs are by far the worst in Ben's eyes. This is where things start getting pretty dark. Ben considers the Arab Palestinians to be, quote, by and large the most evil population on the face of the planet, and says they are, quote, rotten to the core. As a necessity of their ethnicity, they are a people of darkness and murder, according to Ben. Considering that they are people of darkness, then, the requirements of secular Zionism for Arab citizens of Israel to be guaranteed equal rights provided, quote, the seeds of Israel's destruction, as Ben says. Ben also claims that, quote, God's roadmap requires the Jews to kill those who seek to kill them. Also, according to Ben, Arabs universally value murder, so put together, how is he not making a justification for genocide? Oh, don't worry, Ben is very against genocide and opposed when people bring it up. He just happens to argue that God requires Jews to kill people who want to kill them, which all Arabs apparently want to do. However, the solutions that have been presented for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are, according to Ben, all half measures, and his preferred solution is thus: mass exodus. For Ben, the only way is to deport every single Arab. even those that are Israeli citizens, from their homes, since they harbor a, quote, murderous dream. How does Ben brush off the assertion that this is textbook advocacy for ethnic cleansing? He compares it to what Churchill and the Allies did to the 3.5 or 9 million Germans in Poland after World War II, which Ben asserts can be done similarly with Arabs, with little trouble. Now, I'd say he's right about that, if he wasn't completely wrong about it. Those German refugees endured basically the same things that the Jews did at the hands of the Nazis. Mass rape, torture, internment in concentration camps, tagged with badges the same as Jews with the Star of David, forced marches that froze pregnant women to death, and mass murder. In all, 400,000 people were killed. Those are genocide levels in themselves, and that's what Ben is prescribing as a solution. He's prescribing genocide, and that's not hyperbole. This is the so-called cool kids philosopher. Paul's right-hand man. So, when he isn't advocating for genocide, basically, Ben is... Hold on. Aiding a former presidential campaign manager and foreign agent to spread pro-Russia propaganda about Ukraine? Wait. What? Me, explain this. Okay, so this is an interesting one. As I assume many probably know, Paul Manafort, one-time Trump campaign manager and conservative Republican Party operative, was arrested for a plethora of federal charges in the Mueller investigation and is now a convicted felon. Before getting to the actual subject that merits him being included here, I just want to run through some of Manafort's greatest hits as a terrible Republican foreign operative through his lobbying firm Black Manafort and Stone. Signing a $600,000 contract in 1985 with anti-communist Angolan terrorist Jonas Savimbi to refurbish his image and get congressional funding for this cause, which he succeeded in doing. Staying on contract even after the Soviets pulled out, the Angolan Civil War was prolonged another decade. Signing a $1 million per year contract in the 1980s with extravagantly corrupt dictator of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. And signing a $1 million contract with the military dictator of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who stole billions over his 32-year reign, Mobutu Sese Seko. Okay, anyway. The thing that Manafort is mostly being convicted of now is his work for the former president of Ukraine and Putin ally Viktor Yanukovych during the man's 2012 re-election campaign against Yulia Tymoshenko. Manafort's job was to lobby the US to support his Kremlin-backed client at all cost, and he did this by various methods. But the most important was his plan to have, as he himself put it, quote, Obama Jews, to pressure the administration to disavow Tymoshenko and back Yanukovych. Alright. How the hell does Ben fit into this, you're probably asking? Well, part of Manafort's strategy was to secretly coordinate with a top Israeli government official to get a statement on the situation, then take that and disseminate the information he'd gotten into the US news cycle. Part of the campaign was an attack on Hillary Clinton for supporting Tymoshenko, due to the latter having recently formed an alliance with the far-right Ukrainian National Party's Svoboda, using the coordinated statement from the Israeli official to legitimize it. Who better to publish a story like that without doing any more research into what's actually going on than Ben? Which is exactly what happened. In October of 2012, Ben published an article on Breitbart entitled, quote, Jewish leaders blame Hillary Clinton for legitimizing Ukraine's neo-Nazi party, stating in an eye-catching citation from an unnamed Jewish leader that the Ukrainian administration had created a, quote, neo-Nazi Frankenstein by issuing a de facto endorsement of Mrs. Tymoshenko and her choices. Funny, that line, considering the fact that the unnamed source was probably Manafort's Israeli contact. In an email from the same month and year as the article to Manafort and former Wall Street Journal writer Alan Friedman, who'd been helping with the whole thing, Rick Gates, another Mueller probe crime guy, cited Ben's article and said, "Gentlemen, here is the first part of a series of articles that will be coming as we continue to build this effort. Alan, you get full credit for the Frankenstein comment." Did you hear that last part? Turns out, one of those obviously guilty fraudsters invented the term that Ben used verbatim in his article, and they even cited Ben as part of their effort. Now, am I saying Ben knowingly disseminated propaganda about a foreign opposition leader at the behest of an unregistered lobbyist for a Russian-backed president? No, I'm not. Thing is, Ben has yet to comment, as far as I know, on his connection to Manafort, or that his name came up in the Mueller probe. Whether it was active collusion or ignorant reporting, neither is a positive mark for Shapiro's journalistic integrity. The quick part about who funds Ben. Alright, so while Ben may try to make himself at least somewhat edgy or against the system by sheer force of his uncharismatic speed-talking, he is all too compromised by old conservative moneyed interests and the supplements racket in the same way as Alex Jones. The two biggest organizations that promote Shapiro, Turning Point USA and Young America's Foundation, both get their funding from the Kochs, the DeVosses, the Mercers, along with many others that I've gone through before. As for Ben's own organization, the Daily Wire, the entirety of its funding comes from the right-wing Texas fracking billionaires Dan and Ferris Wilkes in the form of $15 million. Just wanted to get that stuff out of the way. Quebec. At 8:00 p.m. on January 29, 2017, Alexandre Bissonnette opened fire on the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City Mosque in the Sainte-Foy neighborhood of Quebec City, Canada, killing 6 worshippers and injuring 19 others. Bissonnette was known to hold far-right, white nationalist, and anti-Muslim views, sentiments that oddly are more common in Quebec than most other Canadian cities. Bissonnette surrendered the same day to the local police and was taken into custody. Fast forward a little over a year during his sentencing hearing. An RCMP document was presented revealing Bissonnette's Twitter activity from a month before the shooting had been overwhelmingly on the pages of far-right American commentators and white supremacist/neo-Nazi leaders. His top 3 most frequented profiles were Tucker Carlson of Fox News and the Daily Caller, John Nolte of Breitbart and the Daily Wire, and Ben Shapiro, whose profile Bissonnette visited 93 times, more than any other name on the list. Now, Ben did address the connection in a Fox News interview, and of course he claimed it was a leftist attempt to silence his conservative free speech, and dismissed the whole thing without much thought. It's easily the most Shapiro-type response you can find, and of course it doesn't take into account what Ben's indirect connection to Bissonnette suggests about his commentary. Am I saying that the shooting wouldn't have happened if Bissonnette just didn't look at a couple Shapiro tweets? No, that's ridiculous. However, that doesn't mean Ben had no influence. Think about it. A man visits the site of a commentator known for fairly intense anti-Arab, anti-Islamic commentary, as evidenced by Shapiro's multiple articles and statements which have landed him on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate watch. Takes basically what he's been propagandized to believe, e.g. Islam is inherently violent, it's invading the West, and Muslims are all just potential terrorists, and goes and shoots up a mosque. See the connection yet? Of course, Shapiro's stubbornness won't allow for such introspection on the real-world consequences of one's words and writings, particularly when they are on the fairly blatantly hostile side. I don't know. Bread for thought. It's a socialist thing. Free the speech. Except for you. Ben Shapiro has been, in recent years, the most prominent right-wing figure shouting about censorship of freedom of speech. Ben has built up his brand quite considerably on being protested and or banned from speaking on college campuses, as was the case at Duluth, Minnesota, and Berkeley. It's a pretty common thing on the right and, strangely enough, fascist side of politics. Hitler complained about having his speech censored in the 1920s. Now, I'm not comparing Ben specifically to fascists or Hitler. I'm simply pointing out that the complaining about censorship is not at all new and is actually a much more insidious tactic of right-wingers than you may think. Anyhow, Ben, like most right-wingers, often just uses the veneer of censorship to make him seem edgier and make his ideas seem better without having to actually talk about them. It's all the more strange than in Ben's case, because he doesn't have a really good track record on supporting free speech in the way he claims. So let's go through a bit of the less than freedom of speech and other related things Ben's written about and said. He's looked back favorably on the film era of the Hays Code, when movies were censored for depicting sex, nudity, violence, blasphemy, and all the fun stuff, and Ben has pointed to this being better because some of the best films were made during that period, and thus we should think better of it. 1. Correlation is not causation. 2. The restrictions also prevented films criticizing other countries like Nazi Germany at the time, restricted people from addressing important social and political issues, and prevented depiction of miscegenation. WTF. 3. Many of those great films were also pushing back against and trying to subvert the puritanical restrictions, i.e. Night of the Hunter, Anatomy of a Murder, The Man with the Golden Arm, The Pawnbroker, Vertigo, Rear Window. 4. Has Ben heard of Jaws, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Taxi Driver, Serpico, The Godfather Part 2, Goodfellas, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and I could go on and on? He stated that the ACLU publishing photos from the Abu Ghraib detention center was a direct attack on American soldiers abroad, because apparently showing that we're torturing people brutally is gonna do that unjustifiably. He's called it a moral tragedy that we no longer use the police to stop people watching pornography, and also that if pornography is legal, then there is no logical reason not to legalize murdering homeless people. Yeah, I still don't understand that one. According to Ben, also, any society that condones homosexuality will lead to a, quote, fluid, careless amalgam of values, and will cause the US to have a fall just like Rome, using the old trope that Rome became really gay-friendly and suddenly weren't ready for all the barbarians. He's also claimed that criticizing the government during a time of war shouldn't be legal, literally calling for reinstating sedition laws. The champion of free speech advocated criminalizing certain speech that criticized the war on terror, calling back to the Wilson administration's crackdown on dissent during the First World War, and the Roosevelt administration's internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. Neither of those are really good examples for something a government should pursue, most sane people have realized. That last one is particularly dangerous in my opinion, considering the war he's talking about censoring people for criticizing is one which has the ambiguous and incredibly far-reaching goal of the defeat of terrorism as a concept, versus the two world wars which had a clear-cut enemy that could be targeted and defeated. If you actually pursued policies that criminalize that kind of speech, you'd be creeping dangerously into the realm of totalitarianism. At any rate, even Ben's most well-known political issue, freedom of speech, he cannot himself be philosophically consistent on even that. Now, there are legitimate free speech warriors who embrace platforming everyone in order to have a debate on the issues and whatnot, and there are reasonable critiques of that idea as well. However, those who make the preservation of their freedom of speech a central facet of their political message are very rarely being genuine about it. There comes a point when you have to ask someone why they are complaining about not being able to talk about their ideas more than what their ideas actually are. Conclusion. Ben Shapiro is taken seriously by a hell of a lot of people, and many, I imagine, think he is exactly what he sells himself as. He's the destroyer of weak arguments, the cool kid's philosopher, the great debater, the Aristotle of our time. Look up his name on YouTube and you'll find literal hundreds of videos of Ben, quote, destroying a liberal, progressive, or socialist college student with facts, logic, and snark. Once you watch a couple, Ben seems like a somewhat authoritative figure, and you might actually take some of what he says seriously. Then, if you have the time, you could go and check up on the accuracy of his claims, and find out that racism still exists, you can be a Jew and not support the Israeli government, transgender people aren't just lying to people, and on and on. Ben is wrong on a multitude of issues, many of which he publicly debates in these videos. But that's not really the point of these, quote, destroy videos. The point is for Ben to appear unbeatable, which plays onto one of his only major strengths: confidence under any circumstance. Despite that, he really doesn't have much to offer in terms of ideas or solutions that you couldn't find from pretty much any Republican congressman, conservative commentator, or mainstream talking head. What does he actually support? Tax cuts, free markets, free trade, neoliberalism, religious freedom, deregulation, and big business, and everything else that you can find from the most boring oligarchic politician out there. Ben's popularity is based almost entirely on his debating skills, his fast talking, and ability to use certain rhetorical strategies to make his opponent look like a fool. Whether the substance of what he's saying is true or not is not important. That's what brought him to prominence, and has built his army of fanboys that spam the dislike on any video critical of Ben, all hoping, I imagine, to become just as edgy and cool as their idol. That is a large part of Shapiro's appeal to the less politically engaged. That feeling of edgy, anti-establishment fervor that you get by, quote, destroying your opponent and scoring a victory for your team. You're the underdog that fought the man and beat the system. And I understand that completely. The problem with that thing, when it comes to people like Shapiro, is that once you scratch the surface of that anti-establishment energy, you find everything that the establishment represents, and worse oftentimes. Is Ben's refusing to call transgender people by their preferred pronoun really a fight against political correctness, or an uneducated, stubborn reaction to something that seems different and uncomfortable to old-fashioned sensibilities? Is it courageous to go against progress and defend the old empire, or is it simply a reactionary approach to the changing world around you? Short answer, no. Long answer, I don't have time for that. I might make this a short series featuring other right-wing personalities, but maybe not. Haven't quite decided yet. I have no idea whether this video will get attention from Shapiro's fans. Expect them to be downvoting and or commenting below if it does. But I'm not really concerned with that crowd as it stands. So, long-winded story short, thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'm always up to hear from people who watch and such. Anyways, thanks again.